Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
Meditations of our hearts be always acceptable. Plateau sitting at about 2,500 feet above sea level. And so this psalm is a psalm of a person who's traveling. Could be a person, originally it was a person who was literally making a pilgrimage, but it could also be the song of a person making a pilgrimage in life, on life's journey, facing some adversity, facing something that threatens to upset us. And the question we want to ask at the very start, and the question that I ask myself, is do you want to be the kind of person who allows what's happening out there to dictate, obviously it's going to have some effect on what's happening here, but do we want it to dictate how we respond and react? So if the world's a mess, do you want to be a mess? If the world's going to pieces, do you want to go to pieces? Or is it possible to tap by some time-tested practices that require practice, that require work, that require training? But again, over millennium, these practices have allowed people to lay claim on calm, to cultivate peace, to send roots deep down into the presence of God. So that what's shaping our lives, what's shaping how we navigate our lives, isn't reactions to what's going on in the world around us, but it's the state of our heart and our mind and soul. That's what gives us the direction by which we move ahead. And the 121st Psalm is a depiction, an incredible depiction of this process. It starts with the line, "I look to the hills, from whence cometh my help." Now, we might think that those two are linked together. I look to the hills, and it's from the hills my help is coming. But that's not what's being said at all. It's I look to the hills, and the hills are a source of incredible stress and anxiety and fear. The hills are ominous and foreboding. They're dark and scary because all kinds of bad stuff happens in the hills. And these aren't civilized tourists traveling. These are people in wild places traveling through wild places. And if you've ever been in a wild place, looking at mountains, you know that mountains are scary. Mountains represent a threat. And so the threat is, first of all, the physical demand of the journey. If they were traveling, let's say, from the Jordan Valley, let's say they started out by the best-known route called the Jericho route. The city of Jericho is about 500 feet below sea level. Lowest city on the face of the earth, actually. And so if they're going from 500 feet below sea level to 2,500 feet above sea level, they're making an elevation change of about 3,000 feet. If you've ever made that elevation change in the course of a few hours, that's hard. And they're doing this over the space of 15 to 18 miles, and they're doing it over the course of a day, with family and kids in tow, right? So I made a similar journey one time, 15 miles, elevation gain of about 3,000 feet, and it about killed me. I mean, it about killed me. It's not just the elevation gain, but it is the gradient as well. And so if you've ever been on a steep mountainside, you know that the paths don't go straight up because then you'd be going up. You'd be going straight up. So what they do is they cut switchbacks into the mountain. And Boy Scouts or whatever, you've done switchbacks. So this journey would have involved a series of switchbacks cut through limestone cliffs. Oh, and by the way, it would be about 100 degrees at this time, ambient air temperature, with radiated heat on the sandstone being significantly higher. That's why later in the psalm it's going to refer to the Lord being their shade. The Lord is the shade, is my shade upon my right hand, so that the sun shall not smite thee by day, and the moon shall not smite thee by night. They have to navigate these cutbacks, these switchbacks through the limestone cliffs. It would be like, going up a 300-story building in a matter of hours with the heat turned up to 100, right? So a huge challenge. And if you know, because you've done this before, that you have this physical challenge before you, and you have to get yourself up there, but also your wife or your husband or your kids. I mean, you're not looking forward to this. You know it's going to be arduous. So the hills that's not where your help is. That's where you need help. How am I going to do this? Where I look to the hills, from whence does my help come? Where's my help going to come so that I can actually do this? And it's not just the physical demands of the elevation change, the gradient, the steepness of the gradient, the heat that they're facing, but it's also the threat. It's predators. If you've been in the wilderness, a plain is a great place to be because it's flat and you can see predators a long way off. So you can do something about it. If you're in mountains, there's valleys and ravines and shadows, so you have no idea what's hiding there. I remember very distinctly one time hiking through the Wind Mountain Range. It was just at ice out, just when the snow wasn't quite off the mountains yet. And the bears were coming out of hibernation. And we were walking along a lake, and we heard something trailing behind us, which we absolutely could not see. We went back to see if we could get a view of what was trailing us, and we went over this little stream, and right there on a rock that was just sticking out of the stream was the paw print of a massive bear. And it was still wet. So, he was not far behind. The great big pad, the huge claws. And as we continued to climb, we could hear him hunting us just off the path. But we never saw him. Fortunately, he never bothered us, but we knew he was there. So the mountains, as a tourist, we look at the snow-capped peaks. And we think, oh, that's lovely, that's where I want to be. But man, if you're ever out in a wilderness setting like these folks were without any, you're thinking, okay, that's where the things are that want to kill me. And it wasn't just animals. A section of this path that they had to travel through was called the Red Pass, or the Red Way. And it was in part because of the red rocks in that pass, but it was also because that's where robbers and brigands and thieves were waiting. If people are traveling, making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, if they're going to Jerusalem, they're bringing their belongings. And so it's a great place to steal from people. So it's called the Red Way because people died there. People killed them there. People shed their blood there. So it's not just animals they have to worry about. So it starts. The person lifts up their eyes. They see the mountains. They see this impregnable pass They see this impenetrable, literal, impenetrable wall before them. They see this terrifying source of extreme anxiety that threatens to overwhelm them. And they ask, where does my help come from? I can't make this on my own. I'm going to dissolve into a puddle of tears and anxiety here. So how am I going to put my next step in front, my foot in front of my one foot in front of the other, so I take my next step so I can actually make that journey? That's what's being asked here. And if you look at verse 2, I look to the hills from whence cometh my help. That's verse 1. My help cometh from the Lord. Verse 2, my help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. That's the traveler answering that question. Where does my help from? The traveler makes this assertion. It's a claim of faith. He may be making it tentatively, trying it on. I'm looking at these hills. I'm afraid, but I have this claim that people have made for a long time before me. I'm going to make it myself. And then if you look at verse 3, it says, and I have to say it together because I'll forget. I look to the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He shall not suffer your foot to be moved. He that watches over you does not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So he shall not suffer your foot to be moved. Or in modern English, you won't allow your foot to slip. You see the change in perspective? It's verse 2 is my help comes from the Lord. Verse 3 is he will not allow your foot to be moved. So what we have of this psalm is the structure of a dialogue. It wasn't meant to, it's not a monologue, it's people dialoguing with each other. This affirmation is made, my help cometh from the Lord, and then somebody else affirms it. And likely one of three things are going on here. I personally think probably all three. This was a psalm meant to be read in worship on a morning, like this morning, when people had grave cause for fear and anxiety and were wondering about the state of the world. They recognized the uncertainty of the world and where there were very real reasons to be fearful. And so the priest would start off and he'd pose the question, I look to the hills, I'm afraid. From where am I going to find help? And the congregation responds, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and the earth. And then the priest affirms that. He will not suffer your foot to be moved. He who watches over Israel doesn't slumber. And then the people respond, he who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So it's meant to be this people affirming each other, reassuring each other, saying, not only do I believe this, but people have believed this for millennium. And they have made this journey safely. And just like they've made that journey safely, we can make that journey safely. The other thing that might be going on is people are literally singing this to each other as they move through the mountains. And the third thing that might be going on, and this is the one I find most interesting, is that this is actually an internal dialogue. So I think it's all three, but we can understand this as a person going through the process by which they recognize that which they're afraid. They don't quash it, deny it, or ignore it. They say, man, I see what's in front of me, and it's freaking scary. And then they ask a question. How am I going to get through this? Where am I going to find the help that I need so that I don't dissolve into a quagmire of worry and anxiety? How am I going to continue to function as a parent? That's really important, right? How am I not just going to pass anxiety on to my kids? How am I going to function as a parent? How am I going to function in my job? How am I going to function as a good person who still wants to do good out in the world? And so they ask this question. And then within themselves, there's this dialogue where they begin to work out the answer. The process is important. When we view it in this way, what's happening? And again, this is, I'm not going to go into, one point, briefly I'll go into the science. I'm not going to go into the science of this. But what's interesting to note is that as we come to be able to do neural scans, next week we need to turn the heat down in here. Like, if it's this hot, we need to go down to air conditioning. Because I can see it's hard for people to stay awake when it's this warm. So you're all doing a great job of sticking with me. You're all doing a great job of sticking with me. And it's actually hard for me to concentrate when it's this warm, too. So, what was I saying? What's that? Oh yeah, neural scans. So we've actually done neural scans, and in the study of neurobiology, we map these things out. We actually know that by the way the brain functions, that the way we talk to ourselves changes the physiology of what's going on up here. So the way we talk to ourselves either shuts us down and makes us non-functional, dysfunctional, or the way we talk to ourselves actually creates a place of calm inside of us, creates a peaceful sense where we're not just reacting, where we can choose a productive path ahead. So it really, really matters. And what we want to do is we want to shift the focus from threat to what we believe, our source of confidence, and what we can do about it. And this isn't just psychological mumbo-jumbo, pop psychology, psychobabble, or whatever the heck you want to say. But this is proven through empirical study and fact that we can change the state of our brain, our internal state, by learning these skills, practicing these skills that were practiced by the people in this psalm thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So what do? Well, they recognize the threat. We've already talked about that. And he's right up front about it. Then he flips the script. Instead of looking at the thing that's making him afraid and that's making him non-functional, it's paralyzing him, the traveler then says, okay, this is what I know. The Lord will keep me safe, just like He's kept people safe all down through the ages. And what that means, I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that God will get me to where God wants me to go. And I trust that. So I'm going to take the next step. And then the person does. So they're aware of the danger. They flip the script. And then there's this anchoring phrase. And the anchoring phrase is, the Lord watches over you. And the word watch or keep, the phrase God watches over you is mentioned 4 times the length of the psalm. The word watch, keep is 6 times. It establishes a cadence that's like a heartbeat. And so it slows down the heart of the person. The cadence of this begins to downregulate the heartbeat of the psalmist, literally slow down his breathing. It becomes like a breath, the praying of this psalm, the back and forth of it, this internal dialogue. And his brain gets the signal that he's safe. And then, again, in that context, he's not just going to react. He's going to be able to decide what he wants to do next, to direct himself from a place of internal faith and confidence, rather than just being overwhelmed by stress and fear and anxiety. So maybe it looks a little bit like this, all right? I've been working on this, but maybe it looks a little bit like this. All right, we're going to have some fun now. Got to give myself a way out. Okay, there we go. All right. It's going to get good now, yeah. Okay. Heidi, I borrowed this from the garden. I hope it's okay. Oh, got to move on just a little bit. Okay. Want them forward a little bit. Oops. Well, probably, but I'm a guy, so I don't ask for help. So I have another illustration for next week that I'm really excited about. So I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but you might not want to sit in the first 2 pews, but it's going to be good. Okay, so what typically happens in our minds is we have a stimulus, right? We have something like the mountains that makes us afraid. So, I'm preparing myself for this. So, let's say that Linda says something to me that I perceive as hurtful, all right? So, here's the initial stimulus. Linda says something that I perceive as hurtful. And what my brain does is that it immediately feels abandoned, right? And so it connects that action with a response, and that is that Linda doesn't love me anymore. I've been abandoned. Linda doesn't love, and then I feel anxious, right? And because I feel anxious, now I'm probably going to go on the attack, and everything's going to spiral out of control. Or maybe feeling abandoned and unloved, I'm not going to do anything at all. I'm just going to dissolve into a quagmire of self-doubt, and I'm just going to go away silent and just feel like my world's collapsing. And that's not necessarily too far from reality on occasion. So what I need to do, I have this time, and I've practiced this over and over again in my life, right? Whenever Linda said something that I've perceived as hurtful, this is how I've responded. So this is my natural response. I see this, I respond like that. And so what needs to happen is that process needs to be severed. It needs to be severed. And what the psalmist is doing in this is he's literally doing this. He's taking his thought process from up here and he's writing it down. And frankly, I probably should have warned people that was going to happen. I apologize. There was going to be a loud sound. But frankly, sometimes that's what we need to do. Like if you're feeling super stressed and super anxious and you're in a quagmire, you don't know how to get that out, write your thoughts down. Literally, write what's going down in your head. And then what the psalmist is doing is externally viewing his thoughts. He's looking for spaces. He wants to be able to tease those thoughts apart so that he can say, okay, here's a space in which I can insert agency. Here's a space where I have some control. Here's a space where I don't need to react, right? Here's a space where I don't just need to go from here to here. There's this little space here, loud noise, where, and sometimes it takes some practice. Sometimes we don't get it exactly right, where we can, sometimes takes, this is why we practice. I'm going to go to the big log next. So, holy cow! Well, like I said, sometimes it's because it's a little bent. Oh yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. All right, so. And you can see that if we practice these things for a long time, they're resistant because they're deeply embedded in our psyche. So it takes a lot of work to learn new skills. So that's what we're talking about. Yes, I could use Liesl help cleaning up. Thank you. We're talking about less reaction, more reflection. We're talking about less noise and more discernment of what's going on in here. Teasing out that process, separating it, looking for those points where we can control how we're going to respond rather than just react. We're looking for less worry and more peace. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.